The end of an era. Jubilant scenes as Malaysia elects a new prime minister and breaks the ruling party's 6-decade grip on power. I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Mahathir Mohamad. Now, most Malaysians won't remember a time when the Barisan Nasional coalition wasn't in power. But after 61 years, that's about to change. In one of the biggest shocks in Malaysia's political history, 92-year-old Mahathir Mohamad and his opposition coalition did the unthinkable and won. The former prime minister only returned to the political front line 2 years ago, and his aim was to take down his former protege, Najib Razak. Few thought it was possible, but after a bitterly fought campaign, Mahathir Mohamad has the top job once again, and his supporters are delighted. For more on this surprise victory, Natalie Pohonen has this report from Kuala Lumpur.
This was always billed as the blockbuster election, the election that was going to be the tightest in Malaysia's 6 decades since independence. And across the country, across the city of Kuala Lumpur where we are right now, this sea of Barisan Nasional flags was expected to stay up for the days to come. This was expected to be a Barisan Nasional victory. It had been a long campaign, a campaign with many promises, even some promises thrown out at the very last minute. In the final hours before campaigning finished, Prime Minister Najib Razak came out with a brand new election goodie, as it's called here, which was to say that there would be no income tax for people aged 26 years and younger. But something incredible happened at the ballot box. Malaysian voters marked their X in favour of Pakatan Harapan, the coalition led by Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, the former Prime Minister, the former head of Barisan Nasional, who had come out of retirement to lead the country again. And those X's marked at the ballot box in places like Kuala Lumpur, in places like Sabah and Sarawak on the island of Borneo, have forever changed Malaysia's political history. The Barisan Nasional flags are still up, but they will be coming down, and they will be replaced by a new coalition.
It's hard to imagine, like we've been hoping for this situation for a very long time, and we've always been hopeful, but a bit cautious about it, cautious optimism. So it's like a miracle really, a dream come true. Yeah.
There's no word to express it, but we are celebrating at this moment, at this hour, without sleeping, because we can't sleep because it's a victory for the nation.
So what's next for the new government? Well, Pakatan Harapan had a very ambitious election manifesto that it put to voters. They were going to deliver 10 promises in 100 days. One of them being to get rid of the goods and services tax, the GST of 6%, which was a deeply unpopular move made by the previous government, Barisan Nasional, and an election issue which I continue to hear about across the country during the time that we've been here. But perhaps a higher order of business will be to do with Anwar Ibrahim, who actually is the head of the Pakatan Harapan coalition. He partnered up with Mahathir, his long-time and bitter political rival, to take down Najib from office, and they have succeeded. Mahathir said that if they were going to win, if he was going to become Prime Minister again, that he would be holding that office so that Anwar Ibrahim could take it over. Mahathir will now have to seek a pardon so that after Anwar Ibrahim serves the rest of his sentence in a few months' time, he can come out of prison and he can return to political office. Another historic political moment for Malaysia.
Well, as Natalie mentioned there, the new prime minister addressed his supporters and said he would pardon his one-time protege, turned political enemy, turned coalition collaborator, Anwar Ibrahim. So will that pardon allow Anwar to become prime minister in the not-too-distant future? Let's speak now to Anwar Ibrahim's daughter, Nurul Izzah Anwar. She is a member of parliament for the opposition People's Justice Party, and she has retained her seat in this election. Nurul, thanks so much for joining us. First of all, congratulations are in order. Most everybody described this as a shock victory. I have to ask you, are you feeling shocked?
Yes, I think we were expecting change to take place by many Malaysians who have worked very hard these elections, but no one expected the tsunami that actually took place across all races. And it's a testament that Malaysians are ready for change and wanting a government that will reward and work for them, not at the expense of their coffers and their future. So it was nothing short of a shocking yet extremely euphoric victory for all of us.
I can imagine. But in that shock meant that, in a way, your coalition really was not prepared to win. And as such, we have no details, really, of how your government will be formed. Everything really needs to be clarified because you were caught off guard, basically. So tell us how much you're playing catch-up now.
I don't think we're playing catch-up at all. I think the fact that today we have successfully secured a swearing-in of a new Prime Minister after more than 6 decades of the same government is a testament that change has taken place in the smoothest manner possible. The Prime Minister himself, former Prime Minister, Dato' Sri Najib Razak, has, conceded rather gracefully, and I think we've accepted that. And we also have a working manifesto. We have appointed our Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister. By tomorrow, the entire cabinet will be formed. And what's most important is not the position per se. It's the point that we are committed to implementing reforms and fulfilling our pledges as stipulated in the announcements in the lead-up of the elections. So I would say we're not caught off guard at all. We're just very astounded by the sheer show of support by Malaysians who guarded the ballot boxes. Remember, these elections was flawed. We would have definitely enjoyed a bigger victory, but we had Malaysians standing by at the ballot boxes, making sure that each vote was counted fairly.
Okay, and you said just now former Prime Minister Najib Razak conceded the election. He conceded defeat gracefully. He said as well that there has been no fraud in this vote. After 60 years, though, did anyone expect him to go so quietly, gracefully, as you put it, without a fight?
I think, you must understand this is the 21st century. Malaysia is one of the beacons of hope in the region. We're certainly not a complete, full-fledged authoritarian nation. We are semi-democracy. And I think it showcases that many people were expecting change. They were actually happy with this transition. And having Mahathir Mohamad, former Prime Minister, joining hands with Dato' Sri Anwar Ibrahim, coming together, trying to rebuild and sort of forge a greater degree of unity, also assuage different stakeholders. You had the Chief of Police of Malaysia saying that policemen can choose any political party that they wanted. You had the head of the Navy saying that, the votes are done in secret. So all this signaling, I think, helped push Najib to do the right thing. And I'm happy because whatever it may be, I'm not going to go to the nitty-gritty to say that there's no flaws. Come on, everybody knew. Everyone, the postal voters overseas, couldn't even get their ballot papers in time. You're talking about scores of people being denied to vote because they closed and the entire process was done in a terrible manner. So I'm not going to go to the details. My point is, moving forward, we are committed to implementing reforms. We'll make sure the partisan heads of the Election Commission, partisan heads of the Attorney General, they must remain independent. They must be replaced by a professional team that will be concerned about taking care of the people, not of political leaders.
Okay, Nurul, then let's talk about your role in this government. You'd said before that you want to be part of Malaysia's future. You want to design its future, actually. But at many points, you've been deliberately vague when asked what your role in the new government will be. What role do you want?
I contested for a seat in Permata Ampau, my father's traditional seat. This is my 3rd term in Parliament. And I think that many young people in Malaysia has to feel that they're part of designing our future. It can't just be dictated by the select few. And so to that end, whatever role I can play, whatever role I am accepted to make, I will continue. I mean, why does it have to be a particular top-notch role? I think we have to start appreciating the smaller bits. All stakeholders should be appreciated, should be allowed to prosper and voice, and that's how you're going to have a burgeoning and successful democracy. If you expect everybody to always want to become prime minister, you're going to have a lot of crisis, and I don't think that's what Malaysia needs. Malaysia needs less of people wanting to become prime minister and more Malaysians wanting to change the future. So to that end, I'm here for them and I want to be part of this process.
Okay, I realize you're not your mother, but your mother has been appointed a potentially reluctant, if I can put it that way, deputy prime minister under Mahathir Mohamad in this new government. Can I ask you, is she eager to stay in that position, or are you all kind of waiting to see how this government should form with patience in the best way possible?
Once you take over position, she's now deputy prime minister, you got to get the job done. So I don't think everyone's thinking about a ticking time bomb or a deadline. You know, once you have a position, you have a contract, obligatory contract to fulfill to the people. Everyone came to ensure we won. They want to make sure that GST is abolished. They want to make sure a meaningful wage is introduced for the people. They want to make sure they have opportunities for jobs. So all these things will take work. So people are not going to talk about retirement anytime soon. People are going to talk about finishing the job. Then you can consider retiring.
Okay, but what do you make of the concerns? And now we'll move on to your father.
All right.
There is an expectation that once he leaves prison, Mahathir Mohamad, who's now 92 years old, will step aside so that Anwar Ibrahim can become prime minister. Now, the concern is that there might be the creation of a family dynasty of sorts with your mother as deputy prime minister, your father as the prime minister. What do you think Malaysia wants to see that, or will there be steps taken to make sure there's no semblance of perhaps nepotism in this new ruling coalition?
Perhaps you can define the term nepotism better. Did I contest or did I not contest in elections? I've been in the reform movement and a daughter of reformasi for more than 2 decades. And I don't think I am concerned about holding any position in cabinet. I'm concerned about being an effective representative of the people. So for me, people can say whatever they want, whatever it may be. 11 years in prison, Anwar spent his life in. And at the end of the day, we're concerned about the reform movement. Whoever becomes prime minister, my job, the youth job, is to make sure the prime minister toes the line of the reform agenda. So I can't care less what people say. The point is how you live your life, how you have your credibility, and making sure those things are intact.
Okay. I have to ask you this. I mean, I've interviewed your father before, and he's always been so remarkably sanguine in the face of outright persecution, really. I mean, he'd spent so many years in prison, often in solitary confinement, at the hands of, people who many say trumped up charges of sodomy and corruption against him. Granted, he did make a masterful political decision in cooperating with his former persecutor, if I can say that, to win this election. But I have to ask you personally, how you, your family, and particularly your father, feel dealing now with people who had persecuted your father so badly in the past. Has all really been forgiven? Is there real trust here going forward?
I think you're looking at a long process. Tun Mahathir left UMNO. He basically started joining our movement. He wanted to be part of the coalition. And I always remember, I'm here not to represent my personal concerns. I'm here supposedly as a people's representative. So to that end, you have to always consider what's the best way to oust the current government, the previous government. What's the best way to ensure you initiate reforms? So having a clear-cut moral compass, having a true sense of what's your main focus will help you decide accordingly. At the end of the day, of course, my younger sister started visiting our father in prison at 6. And then I had my daughter started going to prison to visit her grandfather at 6 years old. Yeah, obviously it's not been easy. but we're not the only ones who suffered. That's why you need to reform the systems, so that no one else becomes victimized by anybody who will hold the position of power as Prime Minister. It's simple. You have independent institutions, rule of law, making sure that whoever it may be, it could be someone sweeping the streets, or it could be the Prime Minister, but he or she will be facing the true face of justice under Malaysia's current rule of law. So these things have a measured outlook on life. Never live life based on anger or bitterness.
Very pragmatic. Nurul, final question for you. The opposition is now in charge. What is your first priority? What is the first thing that we're going to see now change in Malaysia?
Well, if you refer to the Prime Minister's statement, one of the key things is the economic burden that people are feeling. As I stated, if you read our budget and manifesto, we stated the first 100-day plan, which really includes to do away with the goods and services tax regime, going back to the SST, and of course, eventually to roll back on some of the burden that are being felt by people. So, like it or not, you need to form a cabinet. You need to make sure you put leaders in place, whether it's the Attorney General, whether it's the different people in the force. These things have to be done. So could you maybe excuse me so I can work on those things? Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Nurul Izzah, we will let you get straight to your very important work, and thank you so much for joining us on The Newsmakers. Congratulations again.
Thank you, TRT. Much appreciated. All right, guys.
Still to come, Iraq prepares for its first election since the defeat of Daesh. Will Haider al Abadi retain his post as Prime Minister? And U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo brings home 3 Americans who were detained in North Korea. On Saturday, Iraqis will head to the polls for the first time since Daesh was defeated in Iraq. They'll be electing a new parliament, who will then elect a new president and prime minister. Now, incumbent Prime Minister Haider al Abadi is favorite to retain the post, but Iraq is still reeling from war. The economy is struggling and security is a major concern. So will Iraq stick with the status quo, or could this election provide some surprising results? We'll discuss that in a moment, but first, here's Shoaib Hassan.
The promise of a new dawn in Iraq, elections for a new parliament. It follows a long fight against Daesh. Leading the list of candidates is the man who led Iraq to victory over the terror group, current Prime Minister Haider al Abadi.
There's an acceptance of Mr. Abadi on the streets. As you know, there have been a lot of problems during this period like Daesh. And Mr. al Abadi was able to overcome them, and he tried to settle things and solve problems. Therefore, in my opinion and in the opinion of the Iraqi street today, Mr. Abadi has a good chance to assume power again.
On May 12th, many of Iraq's 18.2 million registered voters will cast their ballots. Candidates from 88 political parties are contesting. 329 seats are up for grabs. 83 of these are reserved for women and 9 for minorities, and 237 are open to all. The real contest is between 6 parties and alliances. 5 are Shia groups, including Al Abadi's Nasser coalition, former Prime Minister Nurul Maliki's Dawat al-Qanun, and prominent Shia cleric Muqtada al-Sadr's Al-Sairun coalition. Also in the running are the former leader of the Islamic Supreme Council of Iraq, Amr al-Hakim, and the Fatah coalition led by the Shia militant Hashd al-Shabi group's Hadi al-Amiri. The 6th is the Sunni Iraqi Solidarity Party led by current Vice President Osama al-Nujafi. Sunnis make up a majority of those displaced in Iraq's fight against Daesh. The overwhelming Shia background of the other parties means Nujafi's Sunni party is likely to cash in.
We made a mistake in the previous elections in choosing the current lawmakers, so we won't make the same mistake again. Therefore, my family and I will go to the polling stations and elect a suitable and honest candidate, one who serves his country.
The Kurdish vote has also been a factor in past Iraqi elections. But divisions over the recent Kurdish referendum and Iraq's seizure of Erbil's oil facilities could lessen its impact. And there's the shadow of Iran. Its influence provides support to much of the present leadership, especially those like al-Maliki, who's presented himself as the champion of Iraq's Shia vanguard. It's led to warnings from senior religious leaders to voters to put aside sectarian tensions. That could help al Abadi with his reputation as a more inclusive figure. So, could the sectarian factor prove decisive in Iraq again? Or will the people turn their backs on old hatreds and vote for change? Shoaib Hassan, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Baghdad is Ahmed Rushdi. He is a foreign policy advisor for the Speaker of the Iraqi Parliament. In Erbil, we have Dr. Nurul Izzah. He is a political analyst who specializes in Kurdish regional affairs. And completing our panel from Washington, D.C., Douglas Ollivant. He's a retired Army officer and former director for Iraq at the National Security Council during both the Bush and Obama administrations. Thanks all so much for joining us. Let me begin in Baghdad with Ahmed. There are so many challenges facing whomever wins this election, not least the sectarianism that our reporter pointed out there. Will voters put that aside as has been asked of them, or will it play a deciding role in this vote?
Well, let's all agree on one thing, is that this election has a critical outcome on the future of Iraq. In a way or another, we have another dilemma that it's supposed to be happen if the results actually didn't manage well for the sake of Iraq, which is the presence of the Hashid with the other political parties inside the Shiite cabinet, which means that there will be some sort of major disputes between Maliki, Abadi, Sadr, Hakim, and the Hashid, or they're going to stand together and put someone as a prime minister from the Hashid, not from Hizb al-Da'wah, which is a new dilemma for Iraq, because at the end, if this thing happen and we have a major dispute between Iran and the US, the game will be played very bad on the Iraqi soil. So we have a critical. That's why I said we have a critical point. We will see it all in Saturday. At the same time, I think if everyone become pragmatic and start to think about settlement, or let's say stabilizing Iraq, there will be another scenario, which can be someone like al Abadi, the prime minister, and make a coalition with Hakim, with Sadr, and maybe individuals from the Hashid and individuals from Dawlat al-Qanun, from Mr. Maliki bloc. So we have either one of two scenarios, either the escalating scenario or the peaceful scenario. So we don't know actually what's going to happen on Saturday, but at the end, it is a critical moment.
Indeed. Nurul Izzah, I can see you agree with some of what Ahmed had to say. I mean, do you hope as well that pragmatism will overcome the sectarianism in this vote?
I agree with my colleague from Baghdad to a great extent, but let's remember that this election is not going to solve Iraqi problem. Iraqi problem is much larger than what we think, what we perceive outside of Iraq. Iraqi sectarianism it's thriving, and also divisions within the Shia groups, within the Sunni, within the Kurds, it's great too. So as well as economic problems, like you said in the beginning, and as well as political problems that we have in Iraq, this election, it's critical, I agree with that, but it's not going to solve the Iraqi election. One of the possible outcomes that is whoever wins, which we assume that the current prime minister might win the majority of votes among other political, in comparison with other political parties. But that doesn't mean he's going to form the government outright. He has to make coalitions with other groups, either with the Shia, with the Sunni, or with the Kurds. But this is going to be very problematic. It's in the past, if it was easy, this coalition between Shia and Kurds in the last two cabinets and governments, this is going to be more problematic for the Kurds to join Mr. Abadi and also for Abadi to join the Kurds as well if Abadi wants to make a coalition with other Shiite blocs, because remember, we have a big military wing, the Shia sectarian wing, military wing in the parliament. They are trying to be in the government as well.
Okay. Douglas, then let me just quickly get your take on what you've heard. And I mean, what is the outcome that the U.S. would most like to see in this vote?
I think the outcome the U.S. would like to see is the most likely outcome. The most likely outcome, though it is by no means a sure thing, this is a real election and there could be an unknown result that surprises us. But certainly the consensus view in the smart money is that Haider al Abadi does well enough in this election to put together the kind of coalition we've been talking about. There are two really interesting things in this election, some things that are new. The first is the emergence of cross-sectarian lists. As we've all agreed, as these groups have shattered, we no longer have Shia unity, we no longer have Kurdish unity, we've never had Sunni unity. That has allowed smaller parties to reach out. So, for example, Abadi's Victory Coalition is running Sunni candidates in Nineveh, led by the former defense minister, Khalid Obeidi. So it is entirely possible, I would say likely, that Mr. Obeidi, that the prime minister, internal to his list, will have 2, 3, perhaps more Sunni candidates from Nineveh, and likewise some Sunni tribal candidates from Anbar. This is going to be something new and different. Now, it's still nascent. It's not going to overtake and totally transform Iraqi politics, but it's an important chipping away at the old system.
Okay.
Similarly, we're seeing the emergence of these new reform parties very quickly, and they're also very important. The NGM, the Quran, the Barham Saleh's party, Iraqis for Change in Baghdad. I don't expect any of these parties to do especially well this time, but again, they are an interesting force that I think will start chipping away at the old politics that we've seen.
Okay, Nurul, let me return to you then. I mean, you pointed out that there are just immense problems that this election won't solve. From on the ground in Iraq, Iraqis need to see a rebuilding of their economy, a rebuilding of infrastructure, job creation, cracking down on corruption, and stopping the return of Daesh as well. Those are major obstacles. But what do Iraqis see as the greatest priority?
I think the greatest priority is security and economy, to improve economy and get rid of corruption that we have in this country. These are the priorities that the voters, the Iraqis, want to see a change. But unfortunately, they don't see any pragmatical steps that Iraqi government has not taken any pragmatical steps to overcome corruption and also improve economy. In terms of security, we all know that Daesh has been defeated in Iraq, but only by military. The ideology still exists in Iraq, and so in this part of the country, in Kurdistan in Iraq, we see that so many refugees from Mosul, they haven't returned to their homes in Mosul because they think it's still dangerous. There is still so many people living in danger in and around Mosul. So it tells you that while the military wing of Daesh has been defeated, but the ideology is there, and therefore we fear that they will pop up in a different shape and form in the near future again.
Okay. If I can ask Ahmed this question, actually, because you were alluding to the divisiveness, really, of foreign influence in Iraq. Now, there is a real problem here from what the Saudi-backed elements see as the threat from Iran's influence, obviously, in Iraq. Sunni Gulf states have pledged, how much? About $30 billion, I believe it is, as part of the international community's efforts to rebuild Iraq. $30 billion is supposed to come from Sunni Gulf states. Is that on the minds of Iraqi voters? Is it at risk if Iranian-backed politicians should win a majority here?
Well, it depends. It depends on the priority. What are the priorities for all the political blocs? I think the most important priority is that we all in one ship. Now, if we got this idea, that means we're going to reach the prime minister, we're going to choose the prime minister as a can make comparison, or let's say can make so many deals with all those aspects. Now, returning to Douglas, Douglas said that there is a cross-ethnic bloc named the Victory, but also there is al-Wataniya, which is also cross-ethnic, headed by one Shia and two Sunnis, Dr. Salim al-Juburi, Saleh al-Mutlaq, and Ayad Alawi, who is a Shia, which is also the first time that happened. But at the end, the problem we have is that how we can reach a real political environment that we all can share a responsibility, the Kurds, the Sunni, and the Shia, in a way to make, let's say, to keep, or let's say, to make us as a guardian for the unity of Iraq first, and secondly, to try to solve the problems. Now, the major problem that we have, the financial aspect. Now, the financial aspect, it's supposed to be the next prime minister. We're looking forward to open doors, still open doors with the Gulf state, try to convince them is that even if I am from the Hashid, I'm still Iraqi, I'm still want to make a very good relation, strong relations with the Arab countries. Now, yeah, it's difficult, it's not easy, but at the same time, if someone like characterizations of the Abadi will be the prime minister, that he can make so many deals with those countries and also still have a good relations with America, still have a good relation with the US, still have a good relation with the international community. That means he can convince them that what they donate, what they offer, what they're going to offer to Iraq will actually at the end, rebuild this country.
I'd like to get Douglas's take then on we've heard. We're down to our last few minutes. Douglas, do go ahead.
Yeah, I think I really don't disagree with anything that's being said. I think moving forward, to answer your question on what will the neighbors think, I really think we're just talking about degrees of goodness here. Iraq is going to be reconstructed. Iraq is going to be able to get lines of credits from its neighbors to rebuild its infrastructure, mostly overseen by the World Bank and the fund to keep corruption to a minimum. I think the difference will be just how fast does that move and how much does it accelerate in what would be, a dream team to the United States and the Gulf states, something with Abadi staying as the prime minister, Barham Saleh perhaps as the president, a known factor as the parliamentary speaker. Then the Gulf states would see that as a very good sign. The United States would see that as a good sign. We would bring in the international financial community, the bank, the fund, other banks, and it will move very quickly. But even in the worst case scenario, were Haider al Abadi and Maliki to band together and create a government that is quite Eastern looking, that reconstruction is still going to happen. It just wouldn't be nearly as fast, and it would take much, much longer for Iraq to recover from the events of the last 4 or 15 years, depending on how you're, or 30 years, depending on how you're counting.
Fair enough. Okay, I'd just like to ask Nurul quickly a final note here. You alluded to some of this in your first answer, really, but do you think what Haider al Abadi did in quashing, if I can use that word, the Kurdish referendum in the KRG, do you think it's an asset or a liability as far as his re-election is concerned?
Yeah, well, just before then, let's remind ourselves that the view from Washington, the view from the European Union, from my experience talking to them in the last few years in America and also in Europe, that their idea of Iraq is very idealistic. But reality here is different. A united Iraq, in my mind, in my view, it's a vague idea. It's a vague notion. It's not going to happen. It's never been there, never will be. Let's also remind ourselves that this country is held together now by the force of Shia militia, not by the Iraqi army, not by the institutions that we have in this country. The institutions are reflecting a different reality in this country, and the military, Iraqi military, is too weak, and it doesn't represent the whole of Iraq. The only reason that Iraq is together, it's by force, and this force, the actor of this force is the Shia militia. And this Shia militia is supervised, the majority of the blocks within the Shia militia, supervised by Iran, a country that the whole world sees as problematic. So a united Iraq, whether you think Iraq after this election is going to be rebuilt or reconstructed, you will spend so much money for this idea and you will achieve nothing like before, all the years that the European community, international bank, and even regional powers are sending money to the Iraqis to rebuild the country. Okay. But in reality, we see nothing. Coming back to the Kurdish referendum, this Kurdish
I'm sorry, Naro, I'm going to have to interrupt you there because we are completely out of time for this segment. We'll have to leave it with your perspective. I'd like to thank all three of you so much for joining us on the Newsmakers.
Nobody thought this was going to happen. And I appreciate Kim Jong-un doing this and allowing them to go. We've picked a time. We've picked a place for the meeting, or summit, as you like to call it. And I think it'll be very successful. But as I always say, who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? But it's going to be a very important event.
The U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has returned from his second visit to North Korea. And this time he came back with 3 American detainees. Pyongyang says the release of the prisoners is a gesture of goodwill ahead of a planned meeting between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump. But there are concerns Pyongyang will use it as a bargaining chip for concessions on U.S. sanctions. As for now, Trump hails it as a political victory. But is it one that could be headed for a diplomatic defeat? Well, to discuss that question and others, I'm joined now by Jenny Town in Washington. She is the Assistant Director of the U.S.-Korea Institute at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies and also in Washington. Will Satrin, he is a Research Associate and Program Officer at the Institute of China-America Studies. Thanks both so much for joining us. Jenny, let me start with you. I mean, is this a political victory for Trump? Should the U.S., first of all, be thanking North Korea for the release of these prisoners, given, according to the U.S., these were innocent men abducted by North Korea?
Well, certainly it is important that they were returned, and it does open some political space now and create the right environment for having more serious, more substantive talks on denuclearization and on U.S.-DPRK relations, as this certainly was an obstacle to being able to have a productive and really productive dialogue about talking about how to normalize relations between our two countries. Certainly, the sentence that these men got was more grave than what is warranted in this issue. But this is something where we do have to be mindful of the fact that they have been there, and securing their release is a very positive step forward.
Okay, I mean, I don't think anyone is saying it's not wonderful that they are now free. But Will Satrin, I mean, is North Korea looking to be rewarded for using innocent men as pawns?
I think so. I think they are trying to appeal to Donald Trump's, the side of his personality that is more prone to be pleased by flattery. But to go back to your original question, I absolutely do not think that the United States should be thanking them or grateful that they released these prisoners. It was a sign of good faith. They should have done it from the get-go. They shouldn't have been arrested in the first place. So it was a positive thing, as Jenny just pointed out, but I don't think that we should be in a position where we're thanking them.
Do you at least agree, though, with Jenny that it does pave the way for this summit between Trump and Kim Jong-un?
I do, to a certain degree. Quite frankly, I think everybody was surprised. If you remember about a month ago when Trump just accepted this invitation to the summit, I think a lot of people in Washington, myself included, were very surprised and disappointed that he did not make a point of at least setting the release of these prisoners as a precondition for the summit. That's not to say that the United States should be in the business of setting preconditions for talking, but to give Kim something as valuable as this, a meeting with the American president, which he has wanted for years, we should at least have secured something in return beforehand. It's happened now. That's very good news, and we can move forward.
Okay. Jenny, I'm just going to ask you this quickly as we're talking about these, specifically these prisoners. Has Otto Warmbier been forgotten, do you think, in this case? Trump said that there will be consequences, serious consequences for North Korea for letting that young man die in North Korean custody.
I don't think he's been forgotten. I think it's hard to assess kind of where we are right now and how this will play into the US-DPRK talks. You know, it is very unfortunate, the condition in which he came back in. And, you know, I would push back a little bit, though, in terms of how to characterize the detainees, is that, you know, by North Korean standards, you know, they had violated some North Korean law, and it's unclear to us exactly what that was. But just because we don't understand it doesn't mean that isn't how it was perceived. So, you know, it is good that they've been returned. It does clear one obstacle out of the way. Certainly it will be addressed, I'm sure, as part of ongoing dialogue. But it does help, you know, set the path forward as to, you know, there is something that can be done on the human rights issues. There is more that should be talked about in that process, including the South Korean detainees that are still in North Korea. And eventually, you know, the longstanding issues of South Korean and Japanese abductees, as well as other human rights issues as well. And you know, President Trump has certainly made human rights one of those issues on the agenda when he talks about North Korea.
Okay. Will, let's move it even further forward then and talk about the summit to come. These two men will be meeting face-to-face as per the plan. Now, after all this bizarre, and if I can call it petty name-calling, I mean, we had Trump calling Kim Jong-un little rocket man and Kim Jong-un calling Trump a, let me pronounce this correctly, dotard, resurrecting a term from centuries ago to say he's almost a senile old man. How do you think they might fare face-to-face? Are these two somewhat, you know, unpredictable, eccentric leaders that will actually end up kind of speaking the same language when they sit down together?
Well, that is certainly the hope, that they will be able to see eye to eye. I think in terms of what you just described as both of them being eccentric leaders that are somewhat unpredictable, I actually only think that goes for one of the leaders, and that's Donald Trump. I think Kim is incredibly smart and calculated. If you recall what Moon Jae-in said after the Korea summit, he was incredibly impressed with how he handled himself, how he didn't rely on his advisors during the meetings to prep him. He could think on his feet. So quite frankly, I would be very surprised if Kim Jong-un hasn't read The Art of the Deal. In fact, I almost can assure you that he has. And I think he's gotten a very good sense of how to get what he wants from Donald Trump. I think Kim Jong-un is preparing for this meeting much more so than Donald Trump is. And I think that has to do with vanity. I think Donald Trump thinks that he's just going to hit a home run his first time at bat. And I think Kim knows what's at stake, painfully so. Lessons from his father and his grandfather, and he's going to bring his A game to the summit.
Okay, Jenny, I can see you're pretty much on the same page there. Let me bring in another element, though, as well. Former President Barack Obama warned, you know, that Trump's pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal actually set a dangerous example for North Korea because if they negotiate and agree to denuclearization of the peninsula under whatever terms, in a few years' time, seeing how the United States has behaved under this administration, that negotiation and the deal could be revoked. Do you think there's some truth to what Obama said?
Well, I think, yes, there is, but, you know, North Korea knows better than anyone that this is the case. This is what happened with the agreed framework back in 2002, is that as soon as you had a change of administration, as soon as there was an obstacle there, instead of working through and renegotiating and dealing with the cheating that was happening, they simply walked away. And they've seen this happen more than once. They've seen, you know, drastic shifts in North Korea policy, both in the United States and in South Korea, with presidential transitions. And so, you know, if anything, for North Korea, this just sort of reinforces that hesitancy and that bias in this process. And what it does is it sort of also tells them that, hey, if we do make a deal with Donald Trump will stick to it. And the U.S., we will have this policy for now. But then, as soon as Donald Trump is gone, we should assume that we'll also have to renegotiate, or this deal might even be done.
Okay, Will, I want to get your take on that. First, let me just notify you both that we've just received word now that the Trump-Kim summit is now confirmed for June the 12th in Singapore. Interesting choice of location, as many thought it would be in the demilitarized zone before Trump said no, he would not, he basically ruled it out. So first of all, Will, if you can comment on what Jenny had to say there about Obama's prediction, and then we'll go on and talk about this, this summit taking place in Singapore.
Absolutely. I think Jenny's really right on the money. I think Obama was right. I think that this has set a very, very dangerous precedent. The executive branch of the United States cannot be trusted, and that is something that Donald Trump now owns. Any deal that was negotiated with Obama can clearly be torn up. Any deal that is negotiated with Donald Trump can clearly be torn up. There are even more uncertainties in this equation. The North Koreans don't know that Donald Trump isn't going to be impeached in the middle of their negotiations with him. They don't know if there's going to be a legislative landslide for the Democrats in the midterms. So that said, I don't think all hope is lost. I think that the North Koreans are aware of this, but they're going to be very cautious in their negotiations. Quite frankly, I think that puts them in a stronger position as well. I think knowing that Donald drew up the Iran nuclear deal for no particularly good reason, that's going to make him somewhat more eager, maybe even desperate to strike a good deal with North Korea, and that's going to ultimately give them more leverage. And let's remember that Kim Jong-un also just was in China for a second time, and I can assure you that he and Xi Jinping discussed how they could get more on the same page, and ultimately that would strengthen North Korea's negotiating point in this upcoming summit with Trump.
Okay.
That said, I think it's incredible that they have now set a date and time. That was one of the big things that Pompeo was supposed to achieve, and I think it's great that that has now happened.
Okay. And Jenny, I mean, your thoughts on the choice of Singapore for the location of this conference in just 1 month's time now?
It's an interesting choice. I think it's a country that, the North Koreans are very comfortable in. They do have good relations. It does provide a bit more of a glamorous setting than what you would have had in Ulaanbaatar. And I don't think it's surprising that it's not in the DMZ, considering, you've already had one Panmunjom declaration. To have a second one simply wouldn't have the fanfare that you would have if you have it in a separate location. So it's, I think in Washington we're relieved it's not in Pyongyang for the optics that would have created, and so I think it's an interesting but good choice.
Okay, we're down to our final minutes, and Jenny, I want to step back for a second and get actually both of your thoughts on this. You raised a point, Jenny, in what you'd said earlier. You said, although it is rather disconcerting that Secretary Pompeo referred to Kim as Chairman Un after this 13-hour meeting or before, rather, when he was on his way to Pyongyang. You said, it's a rookie mistake that raises red flags about how prepared the U.S. really is for this engagement process. You see it as a serious folly. Why does it matter? He slipped up on a name and said Chairman Un. According to him, it shouldn't be this big of a deal. Why is it?
Well, I mean, it's the basics. It's like the fundamental things you should know. It should be second nature. If you're working with North Korea, you're working with Kim Jong-un, you should know. And it should be rolling off the tongue, Chairman Kim. The fact that you don't know the difference between the last name and the first name really does matter. And it shows how little knowledge base there is right now in this administration as they're moving forward. And the point that Will made earlier is what you see is on the North Korean side, they are very prepared. The people that are working on their North Korea, on their American division have been doing this for years. They were part of the agreed framework negotiations. They know the Americans inside and out. They've been following domestic politics. They've been following foreign politics. So they know what to expect. They know how to prepare. They know sort of the parameters of what's realistic and what they can get going forward. And so when you have such a sort of rookie, amateurish mistake on the U.S. side, it really belies a greater concern as to, what does the U.S. really think, what do they really know about North Korea, and how much are they going to give away? And I think we had this problem, again, back in the Leap Day agreement, when you had a negotiator that didn't know North Korea and didn't get what he needed to do to have a solid, secure agreement.
Okay. Will, I can see you agree. Unfortunately, I can't let you respond there because we are completely out of time for this segment. I'd like to thank both of you really so much for joining us. Very insightful on this edition of The Newsmakers.
Thank you so much.
I, Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, do hereby swear to be faithful to the Republic of South Africa. So help me God. Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another.
Guys. Yeah, the other side.
Have a nice time, huh?
He was an amazing man, and he was a hero to a lot of people.
That's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Andrea Sankey. Remember, you can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.